As someone who loves the feeling of progression, immersion, and developing my own playstyle, I've been enjoying Elden Ring. It uses a mix of many modern but also many older game systems and philosophies, which makes it stand out in the modern gaming sphere. The fact that this game has only one difficulty setting, which I would label as hard mode, may be daunting for new players to get into the game, so I'll be going over some of the core systems and mechanics of Elden Ring as well as the strengths and weaknesses of the game in my opinion, so that you can find out for yourself if you think it's worth playing. Elden Ring is a Souls-like game, which means it's an action RPG with an emphasis on difficult and punishing mechanics you need to overcome, whether it is through understanding how to counter enemies, developing your character further, or just getting good. If it's your first time playing, you will die, and you will die a lot. But death is very meaningful to the game because whenever you die, you get sent back to your last checkpoint and lose all of your runes, which are essentially experience points earned from defeating enemies you exchange to level up. To retrieve your runes, you need to make it back to your corpse, but if you die again before retrieving them, those runes are gone for good. Decision making and risk management are important. You need to either play carefully throughout the game so that you can continue leveling up and getting stronger, or you can decide to farm runes and level up before entering a new or risky area. If you like exploration, then Elden Ring has a wide open world to travel with secret dungeons to discover, castles to ascend, nightmarish landscapes, and beautiful scenery. Unlike most modern games that have such beautifully crafted landscapes that you can't enjoy because you're too busy looking at the user interface or rushing to get to the next objective, Elden Ring forces you to slow down because enemies are so dangerous that you need to carefully consider your movement. Secrets and unexpected paths are not only available to discover, but are required to find to progress through many zones. You need to stop and look at the environment because you want to find some hidden loot or to solve a puzzle, which further helps you to enjoy the beauty of the game. Like the other games in the Souls series, there is very little direction, but unlike them, Elden Ring allows more freedom. They provide almost no explanation for many of the systems in the game, and you may need to search online how to complete a quest, which gives you no hints to where the relevant locations are. Also, there is no quest log, so you may take a break for the day, come back, and have no idea what your objectives are or what quests you have progressed. Because the game offers you so many choices, it also allows you to make many mistakes or to get lost. You need to figure out where to go yourself and sometimes decide that you've gone to a place that is too dangerous for you at the moment and turn back or run straight through enemies. You can come back later after taking a break to rethink your strategy or to level up some more. Rather than a linear experience where difficulty ramps up, the game will strategically place a much harder boss than you can handle in front of you, like the Tree Sentinel, which is one of the first enemies you'll see. For most players with no experience in the game, this boss will be impossible at first, and while I think that sometimes the boss mechanics in this game are way too punishing and unfair, you don't actually need to fight them. In fact, out of the multitude of bosses, there are only a handful of them which are mandatory to defeat, so it's entirely possible and intended to leave and come back later. It helps to immerse yourself in the danger of a situation and to appreciate your growth when you finally return and succeed with your newfound skills or knowledge. That being said, much of the game revolves around fighting bosses, as pretty much every dungeon sequence predictably places a boss at the end of it. While I enjoy exploring the dangerous mines and creepy catacombs, solving puzzles, and looking for secret passageways, those can often feel like a minute portion of the gameplay because when you get stuck on a boss for hours, it can be extremely frustrating, and while there are many bosses that feel fair despite being difficult, there are just as many bosses that feel completely bullshit or are just a counter to your playstyle. For a game that is so heavily combat based, the combat feels clunky and imbalanced. There are so many different playstyles in the game, but because weapons you may find or not find scaling with your stats, and leveling your stats is a journey-long endeavor with only a few chances to reset them, it can be inconvenient to play the way that you want. If you want to dual wield, you need 2 weapons of the same type, and if you get a cool new sword, you need to wait until you get another cool new sword of the same type. At first, I was using straight swords, but the game stopped giving me better ones, so I eventually re-rolled into katanas, but then I needed dexterity instead of strength. Next thing you know, I'm running a meta build because testing out new playstyles was just not worth it. Though I may be nitpicking here because there has to be some permanence to your build, otherwise you could just swap at any time to counter the situation, rather than trying to figure out how to handle each situation while overcoming your weaknesses. Dodge rolling is by far the most important mechanic to the game because during a very short window of time, you are invulnerable to attacks, and the attacks that bosses do in this game do way too much damage. But if you time your dodge wrong and get hit before you dodge, your dodge is still queued up and you will dodge after your character recovers from the recoil, and then you get hit again because the game forced you to dodge when you didn't tell your character to do so, and the timing is off. You can create space to avoid a sequence of attacks, or you can use terrain to go above or below an attack, but until you find the right strategy or understand all of a boss's animations, you're going to be destroyed over and over and over. So long as it's one of the well-designed bosses with fair mechanics, I don't really have a problem with this, and even developed a personal grudge against some enemies, and despite knowing I can skip them, I got lost pursuing the kill. The gameplay loop of Elden Ring is start exploring an area until you find something that looks like a specific path, fight through enemies or look for loot while progressing through each checkpoint, then finally you find the boss room, and if you don't immediately one-shot the boss, you try to optimize your run back to the boss so you can keep practicing their mechanics. One thing that is nice is that the runbacks aren't that brutal. The checkpoints are usually near the boss so you can focus on them. Once you figure out how to beat the boss, you return to exploring or continuing the main story. But what is the purpose of all this? Well, you're a tarnished who must journey to the Erd tree, which can always be seen when outside. Because much of the game is dark and gloomy, the few things that are meant to look beautiful certainly do by contrast. However, the story isn't as clear as a massive pillar in the middle of everything. Many characters speak in riddles, it's easy to miss important dialogue, and many events will occur out of order. If you want to experience a more polished narrative with many characters interacting and evolving with the plot, you won't get that unless you look up a lore video, and even then you will be confused for a while. However, George R.R. Martin contributed to the world building, and it has that same morbidity and ruthlessness of Game of Thrones. The world feels lonely, but also it tells a story through the environment and lets you just imagine what the purpose or history of each place is. The items that enemies drop can also be important, since inspecting them will give extra lore, but the game doesn't really tell you how to do that, and you have to figure out that you need to press 2 buttons in succession. But that gives you more reason to fight every boss you see, which can be overwhelming as well. One thing I really appreciate about Elden Ring though is their enemy roster. There are so many diverse enemies that all fit the environment they belong in and drop items that you can see them wearing or that it makes sense that they would be holding. And learning how to fight a rabid dog is completely different from fighting a bat or a giant. Even when you fight the same enemies that you already learned how to overcome, they get placed in different formations and environments to make you rethink your approach. You start out the game fighting these big trolls, and then you fight a troll in a confined area, and then you fight a troll with guards around it, and then 2 trolls at the same time. By then you realize how far you've progressed, and enemies you once treated as a boss are now just a normal enemy you can farm. I know that the loyal fan base to the Souls series loves boss fights, but I enjoy the exploration and fighting mobs in the different environments more than wiping to a boss until I can figure out its specific mechanics. I'm not saying that the game should cater to players who don't like fighting bosses more, I'm just saying what I prefer. I played the entire game on a keyboard and mouse, which is completely doable, but it is definitely preferable to do so on a controller. The default keyboard controls had to be completely remapped, and it took me a really long time to get used to the controls afterwards. The game also has some frame rate issues which made it really hard to react to boss animations when it was occurring. Also, the game has an online component to it. You can play cooperatively or competitively with other players and even see messages from them that can give you hints on how to proceed, but it's very limited. The PvP is not very balanced or meaningful, so I suggest playing offline if you're having performance issues or don't want other players spoiling or trolling you with their messages. All things considered, Elden Ring is still one of the better games of the decade. I understand that the game is supposed to let you find things out yourself, but there are still a lot of accessibility issues that could be improved with better tutorials, and the story and quest lines could be more clear in your first playthrough since it takes about 100 hours to complete, and the first 10 to 20 hours of those can be extremely frustrating until you finally get into the flow of it. Also, the controls feel extremely clunky. If you don't have that much time to invest into the game before it starts to become fun, I can totally understand it not being worth it. Despite all those flaws, I got immersed in the world of Elden Ring and was extremely addicted, so I would give the game an 8 out of 10. If this video was helpful, consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribe for more videos, and I will see you all next time.